If you didn't already know, I'm a big fan of handheld consoles. From the Game Boy Color to the Steam Deck, I've tried them all. Well, not literally all of them, but a lot of them. As much as I've loved playing the Game Boy Advance, DS, 3DS, and Switch, I always find myself coming back to the Sony handhelds for some reason. The PSP and the PS Vita. The PSP is my all-time favorite handheld console, so naturally I was pumped in early 2011 when the PS Vita was announced. The stars in my eyes were glistening at the thought of an even more powerful PSP. The PlayStation Portable was a massive success, and developers and Sony themselves gave the PSP so much support. From home console games receiving their very own portable entries like God of War, Jak and Daxter, Ratchet & Clank, GTA, MotorStorm, and more, to PSP games getting their very own console ports, which you did not see happen very often, but it happened quite a lot with the PSP games. The PSP library is filled with well-made AAA titles of every genre, and with this support and overall success, we all expected the PS Vita to just be kind of more of the same, but with even higher performance and graphical fidelity. And at first, many developers seemed ready to support the Vita in a big way, but sadly those plans quickly fell to the wayside when the Vita's sales grew more and more disappointing. With that came a lot of cancellations, and many games that were once exciting prospects are now just distant thoughts and what-ifs. Today, I wanted to take a moment to go over some of those canceled games that I personally am the most saddened about not ever making it to the PlayStation Vita. 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim is a side-scrolling action and kind of RTS hybrid from Vanillaware, who also made the very well-received Odin Sphere and Muramasa the Demon Blade, and a game that actually did receive a Vita port, Dragon's Crown. With the popularity of Dragon's Crown on the Vita, a lot of fans, including myself, were quite excited to hear that Vanillaware's next title would also be getting a Vita release. To put things in perspective, this game was originally being created as a PS4 and Vita title back in 2013, but with the many delays that would eventually push the game's release out all the way to 2019, the Vita version of the game was officially canceled in 2018. By 2018, any life that the Vita had left was continuing to fade, and it really just didn't make sense for Vanillaware to release the game on a platform that would not produce the sales to justify the effort. So, understandably, and sadly, 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim Vita Edition never saw the light of day. AeternoBlade 2 is an action game developed by Core Cell Technology, and although it is a bit of a niche title, it was a reasonably well-anticipated game for Vita fans anyway. Originally planned to be a Vita and 3DS title, the game found itself in a bit of a development hell with numerous members of the dev team leaving the studio, which kind of ended up resulting in the project essentially restarting with a new team and obviously seeing a significant delay from its original release date being sometime in 2015 to its eventual release date in 2019. In a very similar fashion to 13 Sentinels, with the timing of the actual release date of the game, it didn't make much sense for the studio to release the game on a last-gen platform like the 3DS and a rather dead console by 2019 standards such as the Vita. AeternoBlade 2 is another game that lives on and is playable on other consoles, but it sure would have been cool to have it on the Vita, and 3DS for that matter as well. Mighty No. 9 is a side-scrolling action platformer developed by Concept and serves as a sort of spiritual successor to the classic Mega Man games. This game was a highly anticipated game being led by former Mega Man series producer Kenji Inafune. And yes, I'm sure I definitely butchered his name, and I'm sorry about that. But anyway, this game was basically guaranteed to find success after raising over $4 million on Kickstarter with only a $900,000 goal. As a result, Mighty No. 9 was essentially ported to every major platform at the time: Xbox 360, Xbox One, PC, Wii U, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, and yes, it originally had a 3DS and Vita version planned too, but sadly after the game kind of flopped, or at least, at the very least, disappointed many fans, the planned 3DS and Vita ports simply were not really ever spoken of again. I don't believe these versions were officially canceled at any point, but it's rather obvious they aren't coming out anytime soon. Nier is a pretty well-known franchise at this point, with the original game developed by, I think it's Kaguya, and published by Square Enix. Back in 2010 when the game first came out, it was a pretty niche title and flew under the radar of most people. And at the time, it was generally considered a hidden gem. It was a Square Enix title, but it was one that definitely flew under the radar at first. But did you know back in 2011, and behind the scenes, there were plans, albeit rather soft plans, for a PlayStation Vita version of the game? Sadly, Nier for the Vita never really left the ground floor, being more of a concept rather than seeing any real production. Us fans also really never knew the game was even a thought by Kaguya or Square because it wasn't even revealed to anyone outside of the studio. 2015 was really the first time it was made public that Nier was being considered for a Vita release. However, sadly, the team that was originally tasked to bring Nier to the Vita was retasked with working on Dragon Quest X instead. Although, in hindsight, this does make me sad because I love the Vita, and having an awesome action-adventure game like Nier to play on it would have been quite awesome. But from a developer standpoint and a business standpoint, putting more focus on Dragon Quest X does make a lot of sense. Still sad, though. I feel like everyone at this point is aware of the Shin Megami Tensei franchise, whether it be the main Shin Megami Tensei series or the side series that also happens to be weirdly much more popular, Persona. The Shin Megami Tensei franchise is a well-known one. If you are a Vita fan, you'll already know that the Vita did receive a fair amount of SMT love, with Persona 4 Golden being ported to the handheld, and for the longest time was the best way to experience that game until its eventual port to modern consoles as well. Additionally, you could also play Persona 1, 2, and 3 via the Vita's digital storefront, as all three of these games had a PSP release which you could purchase on the Vita store as well. So, us Vita fans were quite spoiled with the SMT love on the console, and the prospect of a new Shin Megami Tensei game optimized for the Vita, much like Persona 4 Golden was a really exciting prospect. However, there were plans by Atlus to publish another SMT game on the Vita, but it was never really clear if it would have been another original entry in the franchise or a more fleshed out definitive edition type port like Persona 4 Golden was. Sadly, like every other game we've talked about thus far, Shin Megami Tensei Vita never left the ground floor, and seeing as it made it on this list, the game obviously never made its way to our beloved Vita at all, and thus became another heartbreaking what if. I saved what I consider to be not necessarily the best for last, but one that I was the most excited for at the time, and of all the games on this list, I feel it would have been the biggest success had it actually managed to find its way to the Vita, and that is Bioshock. Back in the late 2000s and early 2010s, it was impossible to be a gamer and not be aware of Bioshock. It was a hugely popular story-driven FPS that was extremely beloved and, frankly, still is. Back at E3 2011, rest in peace E3, the lead designer and creator of Bioshock, Ken Levine, had announced to the world that a handheld version of Bioshock was going to make its way to the Sony PlayStation Vita.
You know, there's another game we've been thinking about for a long time. It's a bit of a pet project of Irrational's, and it's set in the Bioshock universe. And this has been kicking around for a few years now. And it's very early days, and the design is still evolving. But recently, we found the right home for it. It's on this guy.
This was a rather mind-blowing announcement that excited so many fans. An incredible first-person action game being made just for the Vita was huge news. Bioshock being what it was, and the Vita severely lacking major AAA titles, this was highly exciting news that left thousands, if not millions of fans anticipating its eventual arrival greatly. Strangely, the plan for the Bioshock PS Vita game ended up not even being a first-person shooter, so all that excitement about having a Bioshock FPS game on the go kind of went out the window when we found out that it was planned to be more of like a Final Fantasy Tactics type game, which in itself is actually really cool, and I would have loved to see Ken Levine's take on a Bioshock Tactics game. It would have been really interesting, but being able to take a legendary franchise like Bioshock and play it on the go was an unfathomable reality. Sadly, that was the last good news we would hear from Ken Levine about this game, because about 2 years later in 2013, he had stated that production had not even started. Heartbreaking news. It had seemed that Bioshock Vita was dead in the water, pun intended, although it was never officially canceled. That being said, although it wasn't officially canceled, only 1 year later, Irrational Games was closed down in its entirety, and with it came the end of Bioshock Vita, a once promising and exciting potential release, reaching a rather disappointing end. Well, there you have it. My personal list of the most disappointing Sony Vita game cancellations. There were a ton of games that were planned for the Sony Vita that sadly met the axe in one way or another. I'd love to hear which games crushed your heart when you heard of their cancellations. The Sony Vita really never did get a fair chance to shine here in the US, and with heavy hitters like these being canceled, I can see why it met such a disappointing end. But hey, I still love this console for what it was and what it still is.